I found the note by accident. It fell out of the bedsheet as I gathered the laundry from the guest room, folded into a small, neat square like something important. I almost didn't notice it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Just one sentence written in black ink on a corner torn from a notebook. Your hands are everything I shouldn't want. My hands. The note had been tucked into the linen I had washed the day before. Only one person had slept in that bed recently. He had left early in the morning with my son to meet some friends in the city. I stood there for a long time, the sheet in one hand and the note in the other, unsure whether I should laugh, panic, or pretend I hadn't seen it at all. It felt like a spark had touched something dry inside me, something I had ignored for years. The kitchen was quiet, filled with the late morning light, the kind that softens everything and makes the world feel harmless. My husband was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone, coffee in one hand, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. He looked up at me, smiled, and without a word kissed my forehead. I didn't say anything. I smiled back. We've been together for over 20 years. He knows what kind of bread I like. He leaves the tea kettle filled for me every night before bed. We have a routine built from habit, not from affection. There's comfort in it, but no spark. No touch that makes me forget how I got here. Our intimacy had become something polite, like a handshake. Even the nights when we did try felt more like remembering than desiring. I used to think that was normal. But now I couldn't stop wondering why the note made my throat tighten. Or why I kept it, tucked inside the pages of a book I hadn't opened in years. That evening I watched him again. The boy, my son's friend. He was helping unload groceries from the car, talking easily, his voice low and relaxed. There was something in the way he moved. Unhurried, self-assured, careless in the way only youth can be. He noticed me watching him, and he didn't look away. He didn't smile either, just held my gaze a second too long, like he knew. I forced myself back inside, hands busy with bags, heart pacing like I had just come in from a run. That moment, that silence between us, had too much weight for how little was actually said. My fingers felt too aware of themselves, my skin too present. I started paying attention to things I hadn't noticed in years. The way I dressed at home, the way fabric felt against my skin. I began to choose softer clothes, thinner fabrics, like a secret no one else was supposed to know. Not for anyone. Just for the sensation. Just to feel something other than routine. When I passed by the mirror later that night, I caught my own reflection in a thin t-shirt and shorts. Nothing remarkable, but something inside me paused. It wasn't vanity. It was curiosity. I hadn't looked at myself as a woman in a very long time. And I realized how long it had been since anyone else did either. That night, I lay in bed beside my husband, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath as he slept. My body was still. But my mind kept returning to that note, the ink still sharp in my memory, as though it had been written directly on my skin. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't want to. It wasn't supposed to be anything. That's what I told myself as I tied my hair back, grabbed the grocery list, and slipped into the car. The day was ordinary in every visible way. Sunny, warm, and dull. My husband had asked me to stop by the store and pick up the usual things. Milk, eggs, olive oil. Things that fill the fridge in the hours. I parked near the local supermarket, the one just off the main road, the one with the uneven asphalt and faded parking lines. As I locked the car, I noticed a familiar figure ahead. Tall, loose-limbed, casual, in a dark gray t-shirt and old jeans. It was him, my son's friend. He turned just slightly, enough to catch my eye, and smiled like he'd been waiting. "Didn't expect to see you here?" he said. Calm. Normal. I told myself it was normal. He was staying at our house. We were in the same neighborhood. This wasn't a meeting, just coincidence. But we didn't walk separately. We fell into step without discussing it. A few feet apart at first, then closer. He asked what I was shopping for. I said something about boring staples. He nodded, but he didn't ask anything else. It was quiet between us, but not uncomfortable. It felt like an understanding, unspoken but mutual. In the dairy aisle, he reached for a carton of milk at the same moment I did. Our fingers touched, briefly, lightly, but the contact stayed in my body long after we let go. I looked at him. He didn't smile. His eyes were steady, not boyish, not playful, focused. It was the way someone looks when they're thinking about doing something they shouldn't. "I left that note for you," he said. Just like that. No build-up, no hesitation, as if he were naming the weather. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words caught somewhere between my chest and throat, like I'd inhaled smoke. "I knew you'd find it," he added, his voice lower now, almost a murmur. "I wanted you to." He stepped in closer. We were at the far end of the aisle, half shadowed by shelves, cut off from the rest of the world by cereal boxes and canned soup. I should have stepped back. I should have left. But I didn't move. "I shouldn't," I whispered. He didn't argue. He didn't ask. He leaned in. His mouth brushed mine, soft and deliberate. The kiss wasn't long. It wasn't deep. It wasn't anything close to what you'd see in a movie. But it shattered me. I felt it in the backs of my knees, in the hollow of my stomach, in the part of myself I thought had gone numb from years of silence. When we broke apart, we didn't speak. We walked away like nothing happened. But in the car, alone, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to recognize myself. At home, the refrigerator hummed, and my husband was reading on the patio. I unpacked the groceries like any other day, measured, methodical. I knew which drawer the butter went into. I knew which shelf held the pasta. I knew every inch of this house. And yet, I couldn't stop feeling like a stranger in my own skin. That night, I folded away the shirt I had worn to the store and placed it at the bottom of the laundry basket. It still smelled like summer and a little bit like him. I lay in bed next to my husband, who reached for my hand in the dark, his thumb brushing my knuckles absently, a gesture he had made thousands of times. But this time, I didn't feel loved. I felt cold and burning, all at once. My husband asked me to drive them. There wasn't much choice in it. His work had pulled him into an unexpected meeting, and the boys had a sports event in a nearby town. He looked at me as if the request was entirely logical, which, on the surface, it was. I had nothing pressing that afternoon. The car was already gassed up. It would only be a few hours on the road. So I said yes. We left before noon. My son sat in the front seat, scrolling through his phone, tapping out messages, laughing now and then at something I couldn't hear. He was comfortable in a way only young people can be, free from weight, unaware of pressure, unbothered by proximity. In the back seat, his friend was quiet, not withdrawn, just still, watching the world through the window. Occasionally, I could feel his gaze flicker forward, meeting mine in the rearview mirror. Each time, I looked away too quickly. I hadn't spoken to him since the supermarket. Not really. A few words, a thank you for grabbing the mail, a polite, "Did you sleep okay?" But there was something thick in the air between us now. A silence that wasn't empty but full, of unspoken thoughts, of consequence, of awareness. After we dropped my son at the campus entrance, I turned to him and said, "We'll grab a coffee while we wait. I'm not sitting in a parking lot for 2 hours." He nodded, still quiet. We found a motel just off the main road. One of those outdated places with beige walls and floral curtains that haven't changed since the 80s. The receptionist barely looked at us. I said we'd need 2 rooms to wait out the evening. She handed over the keys with a practiced hand. Nothing strange about it. Nothing wrong. My room smelled like detergent and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled slowly, unsure what exactly was winding so tightly inside my chest. I didn't undress. I didn't pace. I just sat there, listening to the muffled traffic, the creak of the ceiling fan, my own thoughts pressing against my ribs. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my suitcase and pulled out a slip I'd packed without thinking. A white lace camisole, soft as breath, nearly transparent. I hadn't worn it in ages. I used to keep it for my husband on special nights before those nights stopped feeling special. I changed slowly, feeling the fabric against my skin, tracing every place it clung, every place it revealed. There was no mirror in the room, but I didn't need one. I could feel what I looked like. There was a knock at the door, 3 soft taps, hesitant, like an apology. I stood still, heart hammering so hard I thought I might hear it echo off the walls. I opened the door. He didn't speak at first. He looked at me, from my face down to my bare shoulders, then back to my eyes. No smile, no hunger, just heat. And something like fear. "I just wanted to see if you needed anything," he said. The words were thin, just scaffolding for something neither of us dared name. "I'm fine," I said. We stood like that. The hallway behind him humming with dim yellow light. The space between us barely a breath. He didn't step in. I didn't step back. For a second, the world narrowed to the distance between our hands. But then he nodded, slow and almost reverent, and turned to leave. And I stood there, watching the empty hallway long after he disappeared from view. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bed was too firm, the sheets too cool, my body too aware. Every sound made my skin alert. Every movement ached with anticipation and frustration. I wasn't angry that he didn't touch me. I was devastated by how much I wanted him to, and terrified by how close I had come to asking. The morning after the motel passed in silence. We returned home in separate cars. My son rode with his friend, and I followed behind, the road unraveling in front of me like a thread I didn't know how to tie back together. The conversation in my head had too many voices: guilt, want, doubt. A quiet, pulsing hunger. I kept the windows half open despite the breeze biting through, hoping that the air might cool what had settled under my skin the night before. At home, everything resumed its usual rhythm, as if nothing had shifted. But something had. And the first person to sense it, strangely enough, was my husband. He didn't confront me, not directly. That wasn't his style. He made his observations quietly, like someone gathering pieces of a puzzle but unsure what picture they might form. We were cleaning out the garage that Sunday when he leaned on the broom and said it. Casual, but deliberate. "I've noticed the way he looks at you." I paused with the box in my hands, the sound of his voice slicing through the dust and stillness of the room. "He's young," I said too quickly. "They all look like that. They don't mean anything by it." My husband gave a short, dry laugh. "It's not how he looks, it's how you look back." The box in my arms suddenly felt too heavy. I placed it down and didn't answer. He wasn't accusing me. There was no anger in his voice. But that made it worse. He wasn't jealous. He was worried. Not for himself. For me. "I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong," he added. "I just think maybe it's easy to forget how things look, how they feel to others." I stood there, silent, aware of every drop of sweat on my back, the grit under my nails, the heat in my face. That night, I chose a black dress. Sleeveless, not revealing, but fitted. It was the kind of dress I used to wear when I wanted to be noticed. Not admired, not complimented, but seen. We were having dinner in the backyard. Nothing fancy. Grilled vegetables, chicken, soft music from a speaker on the table. My husband poured wine. My son laughed loudly at something meaningless. And his friend, he watched me. He didn't flirt. He didn't smirk. He just watched. Every time I passed him a plate or refilled a glass, I could feel his eyes on me. Not possessive, not juvenile, but attuned. After dinner, I went inside to make coffee. Only 2 people liked it with cinnamon. My husband and him. I made 3 cups out of habit. When I turned from the counter, he was standing there. The kitchen light painted everything too clearly. no shadows to hide behind. "You're not pretending very well," he said quietly. I set the mug down without answering. He stepped closer. "Why are you pretending at all?" I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't a boy playing games. There was no smugness, no challenge, just a raw sort of confusion and desire that he wasn't trying to hide anymore. My hand brushed his when I passed him his cup. Not on purpose, but I didn't flinch. He didn't move away either. In that moment, it wasn't passion that terrified me. It was how natural it felt to let the space between us shrink. And as I turned to leave the room, I heard his voice again, low, barely more than breath. "I think about you more than I should." I didn't respond, but the sound of it followed me out the door like a second heartbeat. The backyard was full of voices and soft, artificial light. My husband had invited a few neighbors over. Nothing formal, just drinks and small talk under the string of warm bulbs he'd hung between the trees earlier that day. It was the kind of evening that promised nothing and delivered just enough to pass the time. Plates with half-eaten snacks, low music drifting through the speakers, laughter that rose and fell in lazy waves. I moved between conversations the way I always did, attentive, polite, present in every outward way. But I wasn't listening. Not really. My thoughts kept drifting to the edge of the garden, the shadows just beyond the reach of the lights, to where I had seen him slip away 10 minutes ago. He didn't say a word. He never needed to. His body carried intention like a scent, impossible to ignore. I waited another few minutes, enough not to be obvious. Then I stepped off the patio and followed. He was near the old fence where the trees grew thick and the lights didn't reach. I could barely make out his silhouette, only the shape of him when he turned his head slightly at the sound of my footsteps. We didn't speak. I stopped just a meter away. My dress was too thin for the night air, or maybe I only noticed it now because I could feel my own heartbeat through the fabric. There was a tension in my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was restraint, thin and cracking. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered. He didn't answer. His eyes moved across my face, searching, questioning, daring me to lie again. "It's wrong," I said, weaker this time. He stepped forward and the ground seemed to tilt. His hand brushed mine, fingers skimming the side of my palm, and I felt myself tremble, not from the contact, but from how much I wanted to lean into it. "Then tell me to stop," he said. But I didn't. His hands moved to my waist, tentative at first, and when I didn't resist, firmer. His mouth found mine. This time without warning, without the false logic of coincidence, without interruption. It wasn't a stolen kiss. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, slow, and terrifying in how deeply it settled into my body. He kissed me like he meant it. Like he'd thought about it. Like he wasn't sorry. I answered him with my mouth, with my body, with every muscle that leaned closer instead of pulling back. I had no language for the want I felt, how sharp it was, how real. We broke apart only when a voice called out from the patio. My husband, asking if anyone had seen the extra wine. I stepped back, breathless, dazed, alive. He didn't follow. He stayed in the dark as I walked away, heels digging into the soft grass, breath still unsteady. Back at the table, I smiled too easily, poured too carefully. My husband touched my hand and asked if I was cold. I said no, but my skin still burned from where the boy had held me. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror. My lipstick was slightly smudged. My dress hung looser than it had felt in the dark. I peeled it off slowly, not for comfort, but because I needed to feel the absence of his hands again, to know it had ended when it had. But it hadn't. The ache was still there, low in my stomach, humming just beneath the surface. In bed, my husband reached for me, as if on cue, as if we had to keep playing the same scene to pretend we didn't know the lines were hollow. I let him touch me. But my body wasn't there. Not really. And when I turned my face into the pillow, it wasn't because I was tired. It was because I was trying not to remember the way the garden smelled when I gave myself away. I couldn't stop writing. Not with purpose, not with a plan. Just fragments. Words scratched onto torn paper, lines scrawled in the margins of receipts and empty envelopes. I wrote the things I couldn't say out loud. Things that only made sense in the silence of the kitchen after midnight, when the dishwasher hummed and the house felt far away from itself. It began like a confession, but never turned into one. I didn't write to atone. I wrote to understand. At first, I didn't even use names. Just he and I, and sometimes you when the words turned too sharp. My handwriting changed. Slanted, pressed too hard. It felt like trying to remember a dream while still asleep. I hid the pages in a cookbook no one ever opened. That week, the house returned to its routines. My husband was warm again, unusually attentive. He brought me a bouquet of flowers from the farmer's market. Sunflowers, my favorite. He asked if I wanted to go out to dinner over the weekend. He rubbed my shoulders one evening while I did the dishes, his touch lingering in a way I hadn't felt in years. And it made everything worse. Because he wasn't doing anything wrong. And I wasn't angry at him. I wanted to be. It would have been easier. But all I felt was distance. A soft, impossible canyon between us. The kind that doesn't show in photos but swallows entire lives. When he kissed me, I kissed him back. When he touched me, I closed my eyes. But it wasn't warmth that spread across my skin. It was numbness. Like I was playing the role of myself in a life I used to want. I caught myself standing in the laundry room that afternoon, holding his undershirts, folding them too slowly. They smelled like his cologne. Clean, familiar, unchanging. And all I could think was, this is the smell of someone who has never looked at me the way he did. I tried to forget. I tried to anchor myself to the rhythm of everyday things. But even the smallest gestures betrayed me. I started wearing lipstick again. Not red. Never red. But a shade soft enough to pass as natural. Sharp enough to feel deliberate. I took more time choosing what to wear. Even at home. Silk camisoles under cardigans. Thin lace beneath simple t-shirts. I told myself it was for me. And maybe in some way it was. But I noticed his eyes linger when I passed him in the hallway. And I didn't look away anymore. One afternoon, I saw him sitting in the backyard, headphones in, sketching in a notebook. The sun lit the side of his face, making him look impossibly young. And yet, everything in his posture held a weight that made him seem older than he was, like he'd already seen something he wasn't meant to see. I stood behind the glass door, just watching him. My hand pressed to the frame, breath slow and uneven. When he noticed me, he didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just looked, as if he was waiting for me to decide whether I still belonged inside that house. That night, I wrote more than I ever had. Not in fragments, not in questions, but in full sentences. Bold, irreversible truths. I wrote about the way I felt when he touched me. The heat that didn't feel wrong, the ache that didn't feel like shame, and the way I had started needing it like air. Quiet, invisible, vital. I tucked the pages between the towels in the hallway cabinet. I didn't want them to be found. I just needed them to exist. He asked the question on a Tuesday. It was just after breakfast. My husband had already left for work, and I was standing by the sink, rinsing a mug. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and toast, the kind of scent that should feel comforting but now carried something sharper underneath. My son was gathering his things for the gym. His friend sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. Black, no sugar, just the way he liked it. I had poured it for him without thinking, automatically reaching for the cinnamon shaker before I realized what I was doing. That's when my son turned, one eyebrow raised. "You put cinnamon in his too?" he asked. Casual. Too casual. I turned slowly. "What?" He shrugged, slinging his bag over his shoulder. I just thought you only did that for Dad. My hands paused over the sink. The water ran too loudly. Behind me, I felt the shift in the room like air moving before a storm. I forced a small laugh, one I didn't feel. He asked for it once. I lied. It stuck. My son didn't push. He nodded and walked out the door without looking back. But the silence he left behind felt louder than anything he could have said. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Not yet. Only when I heard the soft scrape of the chair legs on the floor did I glance over my shoulder. He was standing now, his cup still in hand, eyes fixed on me. Calm. Clear. He's starting to notice, he said. Not accusing, not afraid. Just stating it. I nodded. I know. We stood in that awkward distance between the sink and the table, the morning light slicing across the floor like a boundary neither of us could quite step over. He came closer anyway. Not rushed, not reckless. Just a slow, deliberate closing of space. You said this was nothing, he said, voice low. You said we'd forget it. I looked up at him, and for once I didn't have the strength to pretend. My lips parted to offer an explanation, but the words stuck. Heavy, cowardly, unfinished. Instead, I said, I'm not sure I want to. He exhaled, sharp and soft, like he'd been holding that breath for too long. And then he reached for me. Just my hand first, his fingers brushing against mine, testing. And I didn't pull away. I don't know how to be around you anymore, he said, his thumb grazing the inside of my wrist. I swallowed. Neither do I. The room felt too still. Every sound, birds outside, the ticking clock, was painfully present. I wanted to lean into him, into the moment, let it break me or carry me, I wasn't sure which. But I didn't move. Because for the first time, I realized something more frightening than guilt or discovery. I didn't want it to stop. Not because I was reckless, not because I was lost, but because something in me had woken up, and the thought of going back to the version of myself before him felt like a betrayal too deep to name. I think about you all the time, he said finally, his voice just above a whisper. I closed my eyes. I know. We didn't touch again. Not then. He stepped back first, quietly, gently. And I turned back to the sink, letting the water run over my fingers until it was ice cold. That evening, my husband brought home takeout, cheerful as ever. He kissed my cheek, handed me a box of sushi, and asked how my day was. And I lied. Easily. Effortlessly. Because telling the truth meant choosing between the life I had built and the one I was starting to crave. The next morning, I woke to silence. No voices downstairs. No clatter of mugs or chairs being pushed back from the table. Just the dull hum of the refrigerator and the weight of the blankets pressed too tightly against my body. My husband had left early for a meeting out of town, and my son had plans with friends. I was alone. The kind of alone that didn't feel like peace, but pressure. I made coffee slowly, letting the kettle boil longer than necessary, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. I didn't dress properly. Just a soft gray shirt that hung loose around the shoulders and a pair of thin cotton shorts. Comfortable. Quiet. Barely there. He hadn't come into the kitchen. I wondered if he was avoiding me or if he was waiting for me to move first. I didn't know which would hurt more. The cup trembled slightly in my hand as I brought it to my lips. The cinnamon was too strong. I didn't remember adding that much. Time passed strangely. I did laundry. Folded towels I didn't need. Stared at my phone. Read the same paragraph in a book 3 times without absorbing a single word. The silence stretched around the walls like fog. By early afternoon, I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked through the house barefoot, letting the floor creak beneath my steps. The door to the guest room was half open. I paused outside, my fingers grazing the doorframe. He wasn't inside. Just the bed, neatly made, the sunlight cutting harsh lines across the blanket. His sketchbook lay on the nightstand, half covered by a water glass. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. I already knew. I stepped outside, the air sharp against my legs. He was in the backyard again. Same chair as always, eyes hidden behind sunglasses this time, earphones in, a silent statue in the sun. I stood at the edge of the patio, unsure what to say, unsure what I wanted to happen. The grass between us felt like a gulf, but he turned his head. Just slightly. He saw me, and he didn't move. I went back inside. It was worse than being rejected. This new space between us, full of things neither of us could say out loud. The tension wasn't gone, it had just changed shape, turned into something quieter, heavier, like a bruise that doesn't show but throbs with every breath. I started pacing the kitchen, the hallway, the living room. I opened drawers for no reason. I brushed my hair twice. I stared at the time like I could force it forward. He didn't come in. And I didn't know if I wanted him to. When night fell, the house didn't change. It stayed still. I sat on the couch in the dim light, knees drawn up, a blanket around my shoulders even though the room was warm. I heard his footsteps finally. Late, well past midnight. He passed by the living room and stopped, just barely, just enough to let me know he saw me there. He didn't speak, neither did I. His eyes lingered for a beat too long, and then he moved on. To his room, to bed, to silence. I stayed on the couch until my legs went numb. Not crying, not thinking, just waiting. For something, for anything. Because I had spent so long feeding on the risk of him, I didn't know what to do with the absence. And when I went to bed, I didn't change. I just lay down in that same soft shirt and let the night cover me like a question that had no answer. The day he was leaving, the house felt wrong. Not in any obvious way. Nothing was out of place. The floorboards didn't creak any differently. The windows didn't let in more light than usual. But there was a hollowness in the air. A quiet that didn't feel restful. It felt like something about to end. His bags were already by the front door. A simple backpack slung over one shoulder, a duffel resting beside it. He moved around the living room with careful efficiency, picking up the last of his things, unplugging his charger from the wall. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look rushed. He looked prepared. My husband walked in from the kitchen, car keys in hand. "I'll drive him," he said. Just that. The words hung there, suspended in the silence between us. I nodded. Maybe I said, "Okay." I don't remember. I only remember the cold that settled into my fingertips. He glanced at me then. My husband. His expression unreadable, but there was something in the way he tilted his head. A flicker in his eyes like he was waiting to see if I'd say something else. I didn't. The boy stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. He looked at me, then at the floor, then back again. He didn't smile. He didn't say goodbye. He just watched me the way he had that first day, before anything had happened, before any rules were broken, and that made it worse. He followed my husband out to the car. I didn't walk them to the door. I stayed behind, still barefoot, still wearing the shirt from the night before, still holding the edge of the kitchen counter like it could keep me from falling apart. The door shut softly. Their voices faded. The engine started. I listened until I couldn't hear it anymore. And then I sat down at the table. The same place I always sat. The same place where I used to drink my morning coffee and read the news. Only now, the coffee tasted like nothing. The cup felt heavy in my hands. Across from me, the chair where he used to sit was empty. He hadn't left a note. He hadn't said a word. But everything between us remained in that space. Unspoken, unclaimed, unfinished. And maybe that was the only way it could have ended. I thought I would cry. I didn't. Instead, I reached for the notebook I had hidden under the stack of mail. The one I had filled over the past few weeks with fragments of what had happened, what I had allowed, what I had needed. I flipped to the last page. Blank. I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote, "It wasn't love, but it was real, and I will never be the same." Later, I made another cup of coffee. I added cinnamon. Not for anyone else, just for myself. And for the first time in weeks, I sat in silence that felt like mine. The door remained closed, but I didn't feel trapped anymore.